Hello, everyone, and welcome in to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name's Bryce Koon, and we have a special guest, not Glenn West, not Sonny Shipp. No, it's a new face, which people might be excited about. Brad Crawford, one of our big SEC guys, the SEC guy for our 24/7 Sports Network. Brad, I appreciate you taking the time in what we were just joking about, a crazy news cycle here over the past 24, 48, and 72 hours.
I tell you what, man, I thought my afternoon was over on Wednesday. I was heading to a restaurant with family, and my phone starts exploding. Have you seen the news? So I get onto X, and yeah, the GOAT has retired, which changes the game in 2024 for, our top-rated coaches, how the SEC will be won. Just so many domino effects yet to play out with this Nick Saban news.
And look, we talk about it later on in the show here, how it affects LSU. Obviously, LSU fans, some mixed emotions. Some people reminiscing on that 2003 team that Nick Saban obviously played a big part in. And then others kind of glad to see him not roaming the sidelines for that big LSU-Alabama matchup for years to come. We'll get into that a little bit more in today's episode. But really, Brad, what we wanted to talk about was, you just wrote a piece and, our fans really enjoyed it, kind of about Brian Kelly's relentless pursuit to really kind of upgrade a staff that, look, has won back-to-back, double-digit win seasons. But, he knew there needed to be more. Your thoughts on Kelly's relentless pursuit to be able to poach two of the top defensive coaches, not only just in the SEC, but in the country, in Bo Davis and Blake Baker?
Yeah, there's not many head coaches with the gall to pull the plug on an entire defensive staff after a 10-win season and go big game hunting for others, which is exactly what Brian Kelly did. He swiped two of the now SEC's best coaches in Blake Baker, the Mizzou defensive coordinator, and then Bo Davis, who's been instrumental in Steve Sarkisian's success at Texas to coach the defensive line. This shows to me beyond a shadow of a doubt in my mind that Brian Kelly still expects to not just win in Baton Rouge, but win big these next few years. The Saban news even increases that likelihood. This should also put, to bed any of those ridiculous rumors about Brian Kelly having his eye on Michigan if Jim Harbaugh leaves. Look, that job's going to Sharon Moore. I think Brian Kelly's going to be in LSU for the foreseeable future, and he certainly has a title to win there. I mean, I saw a Texas fan yesterday on social media respond to my article on Brian Kelly saying, LSU overspent on Bo Davis. Meanwhile, everyone I've spoken to associated with the Longhorns today said that Bo Davis was the single most important assistant that Steve Sarkisian's had these last 3 years. Why did Texas make the playoff this season? Just because the Horns were, dominant, stopping the run and rushing the passer. Two things you have to be an elite program.
Obviously, LSU is coming off a defensive effort in 2023 that, look, I mean, you don't have to be a fan of LSU or the SEC to know that that's not their moniker. That's not what they want to put out on the field. And Brian Kelly was pretty candid, Brad. I even go back to SEC media days where he talked about, we're going to have to see. I mean, he really didn't say, hey, we're going to be good or this is going to look really, really good.
Right.
He said we're going to have to see. And look, I think the media, us included down here in Baton Rouge, maybe kind of thought that, hey, they'll figure it out because of the logo on the side of the helmet, and they never really did. So when you talk, I know you talked about Bo Davis, when you talk about Blake Baker, his background in Louisiana, obviously Louisiana Tech, and then his playing days down at Tulane, and then obviously being the linebackers coach at LSU, what does he bring to the table in terms of commanding a defense, and what should LSU fans be looking forward to, and maybe an attacking style of defense that's being brought to Baton Rouge?
Yeah, one quick note on Brian Kelly and, what he said at media days about not exactly being ahead of schedule at LSU. I actually spoke to Brian off to the side after he went at the podium for about 8 to 10 minutes, and I asked him, do you think the infrastructure is in place to win a title in 2023? And like you said, man, he was not gung-ho about this being a championship team. No one saw Jaden Daniels win the Heisman, but I think that he expected the defense to, maybe scale back a little bit, not be historically bad the way it was. But even Brian Kelly wasn't too anxious to see a team that previously won the SEC West, what it would do in 2023. I think now expectations have changed with Bo Davis and Blake Baker. But just some background on Baker, his defenses are all about creating havoc. Lots of blitzes, pressures, believing in his corners to play man. Missouri led the SEC in takeaways this season, finished third in sacks, I think third in tackles for losses as well. Blake Baker's defenses are going to give up some chunk plays in the passing game. And I know that's something the LSU fans might not want to hear because, they take a lot of chances. But I think that's okay. The last thing Brian Kelly wants to see next season out of this defensive scheme is, a bunch of guys at the back end who are unsure of themselves in coverage and taking bad angles at that. And with Blake Baker, this hire, I think he's going to make sure LSU is super solid at the corner and safety spots, and then he'll adjust accordingly. You're only as good as your personnel, and Baker seemed to really understand that and master that under Drinkwitz at Missouri. And, he's going to have several draft picks there, and now in Baton Rouge, he's going to have even more talent to play with.
Obviously, LSU trying to revamp with the portal closing, but now potential windows opening up across the country with that defensive line group. When you look at this roster construction, I know you mentioned you talked to Kelly with that after he stepped off the podium in Nashville back in July. But when you look at it now, 7 months later, how do you feel about gauging? I know it's way too early, but where this roster is kind of heading into winter workouts and into spring ball?
It's funny. I think a lot of people look at the issue potentially at quarterback with, the Heisman winner probably being a first-round pick here in a few months. But I've got no issue with Garrett Nussmeier. I thought he was a top 10 quarterback heading into this season, even as Jaden Daniels is backup. I had Nussmeier in my top 10 SEC quarterback rankings, and I didn't have any other backup in college football, maybe outside of Malik Murphy at Texas, as a top 10 player in his own conference. And then what does Garrett Nussmeier go out and do, in the Outback Bowl, now known as the ReliaQuest Bowl, throws several touchdown passes, leads LSU to victory. I think he's a very good quarterback. I think retaining Joe Sloan, despite losing Mike Denbrock to Notre Dame, that's huge. Joe Sloan is whom I consider one of the top quarterback coaches in the country, and he's going to be able to develop Nussmeier into an all-SEC caliber player. Now, the one issue I have here is, who are going to be the elite wideouts to step up at LSU. We know the Tigers can recruit well. There was some depth there, behind Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. But we're talking about two stud guys who are going to be day one, day two picks in the NFL draft, and it's hard to replicate that production. So if LSU finds a run game and, has some guys step up, maybe Kyron Lacey at wideout, then that offense should still be humming. But as you mentioned, the biggest question, if LSU can go from a 9-10 win team to potentially 11-12 and getting that expanded playoff is, how the defense is going to look. And I think you start with the front seven. They've got some key guys back on that pass rush. And then Harold Perkins. He became the Harold Perkins we knew as a freshman during the second half of this sophomore season. And if Harold Perkins, has a 10-sack, 20 tackle for loss season, LSU's defense should be pretty good.
Yeah, and he will definitely get that draft stock back up into that top 32 picks there next April. So, you mentioned there kind of what LSU has going forward, and it begs the question of, look, Brad, I'll paint this, and then I want to get your thoughts. LSU's role in this new look SEC. I mean, I sit in the camp of, before I got down here to cover the team, following the SEC, you see LSU as a team that should be competing for championships. Brian Kelly has been very adamant. This is not a retirement tour for him to come down here, in the sportsman's paradise, as he has mentioned multiple times in press conferences. Yeah. As we expand to this 12-team playoff, I kind of sat with, before the news of Nick Saban, and maybe still with the news, there was a tier 1 and tier 2, and then you could keep going down to the SEC. My tier 1 was maybe Texas, Alabama, and Georgia, with where they are, financially, with roster construction, and just the momentum they have heading into 2024. I had LSU in that tier 2. Where do you sit? Do you agree with that? Do you kind of think they can, maybe are they a little bit less, a little bit more? And as Brian Kelly builds towards 2024, I mean, what is their role in a new look SEC and in a 12-team expanded playoff?
Yeah, I think before Nick Saban's retirement, I would have had LSU in that second tier with probably Tigers leading it, and then Ole Miss and Tennessee just behind them in that mid to top tier, but not in the elite tier. Now with Saban gone, I think Alabama might drop back at least for a year or two into that still solid tier, but not 1 or 2. And then LSU has a chance to really leap into that role. I think it's going to be very important for Brian Kelly in year 3 in Baton Rouge to start off hot in September. Like, there's several winnable games, but you can't go out and lose that, opening game against USC. I think that's being played in Las Vegas. Lincoln Riley has a program right now, Bryce, that might take a step back in the Big Ten. That's a game LSU has to have. We saw the LSU lose the opener to Florida State this season, which, turns out that was a pretty big loss because Florida State finished 13-1. So if you can beat USC goes on to win 9 or 10 games. That'll be huge in this expanded playoff. But I think for the programs like the LSUs, the Penn States, the programs that might not win 11 games a year, but you're pretty much guaranteed to win 9 or 10 because of talent, that's going to really help those programs make this playoff pretty much annually. And I think if I'm an LSU fan right now, that would be my expectation under Brian Kelly. Like you mentioned too, he did not, leave Notre Dame to have some couple-year swan song at LSU. He left because he hasn't won a title yet. I had him number 3 in my top 25 coaches entering 2024 today, just behind Kirby Smart and Jim Harbaugh. I think he will be the next coach who hasn't won a title to finally get a ring. Might not happen in 2024, but it's going to happen soon in that expanded playoff.
Yeah, I saw a list last night and a lot of different, stuff coming out with the Saban retirement of the number of coaches that have won a title, since we went to the playoff. And it's like 4 or 5. I mean, it's
Not
crazy.
Many, yeah.
It's crazy. So you talk about Brian Kelly making that jump. And look, we've had a lot of conversation on our message boards about what should the expectation be, Brad, as we kind of close this portion of it off. I mean, if I'm an LSU fan and I'm sitting at home and I see 12 teams and I know that we may see some changes with the Pac-12 not being a Power 5 conference anymore, LSU should be on the cusp or at least in the contention for that 12-team playoff each and every single year. And I think it's safe to say, would it be a disappointment if they're left out here in 2024 and beyond as we kind of, make the playing field a little bit more friendly to other programs with multiple losses?
Yeah, especially when Brian Kelly has invested in 2 elite defensive coaches. Like we mentioned, open the show, Blake Baker and Bo Davis. He's completely revitalized that defensive side of the ball, has a good signing class coming in. And as you mentioned, I consider 10 to 12 programs nationally as some of the haves in college football. LSU is without a doubt one of the haves. It's a top 5 job whenever it comes open. I think it's the last 4 head coaches have won national championships there. Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Ogeron, and I'm projecting Brian Kelly down the road to win one. So LSU is one of the elite jobs. The infrastructure is in place to win big. He has the backing of boosters, as he told me last summer in Nashville at Media Day. So like you said, if LSU finishes 8-4, 9-3 this season in 2024 this fall and misses the playoff, I think that's a disastrous result. And LSU fans would not be happy. Brian Kelly would not be happy. Maybe some more staff changes even would happen. But this is a team that I think does get to double-digit wins. Maybe that happens during bowl season and not during the regular season. But if you protect Garrett Nussmeier, you can run the football, you find a couple elite wide receivers, and you're just a little bit better on the defensive side of the football, then you're going to be a good team. And the schedule, in my opinion, can, set up for a decent run to this thing. And if they start off hot and, start September 5-0, they get an open week before Ole Miss. We're talking about 5-0 LSU, 5-0 Ole Miss, maybe game days in Baton Rouge for that one. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, 8 months out. But this is what we do this time of year, and I'm excited to see what LSU is going to bring to the table.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I mean, you look at the schedule in that back half. Look, LSU is going to get Ole Miss at home. They're going to get Alabama at home, and they're going to get Oklahoma at home. Those kind of prime time, as we look at those games here in the month of January, those obviously can change. Rosters not set. And a big reason, Brad, those rosters aren't set as we do our final topic of today's show. Everyone wants to know, how does LSU benefit from a Saban-less Bama? I mean, this is a situation where obviously at the forefront of fans' minds, and our message board went crazy last night, was, okay, who can we look to get off that roster? The 30-day window has happened. It has occurred. Coaching staff, I mean, all these different things. But, Brad, I've been kind of cautious into our followers saying, hey, I think they know who they're going to hire. And if they hire who they know they're going to hire, there may not be as much attrition as people might think. Your thoughts on this whole situation outside of moving into that potential tier 1 from a roster management and potentially coaching aspect? How does LSU benefit from a Nick Saban-less Alabama?
Yeah, a friend of mine in Tuscaloosa texted me this morning, and he talked to a player from Alabama last night, a current player who listened to Nick Saban, and he said one of the 3 things Saban told the team yesterday was just wait it out 72 hours and don't make a rash decision. What that tells me is Greg Byrne, Nick Saban, they already know who they think they're going to hire at Alabama. It's a matter of, the guy signing the dotted line and saying yes and leaving the elite job that he's going to leave. That leads me to believe that, the players like Caleb Downs, who LSU would love to have, who wouldn't love to have a 5-star freshman safety who was all SEC and made plays. Deontay Lawson, you know how good he'd be at outside linebacker in Baton
Oh,
Rouge?
man.
Outstanding player. And, you know, there's a few wideouts too there. Kobe Brentis, you know, some other guys, Isaiah Bond that would be stars at LSU. So there's certainly going to be some LSU, you know, coaches that once it's okay to contact these players. 30-day window, by the way. So when a coach and this is an SEC to SEC possible transfer, all that's okay now that Nick Saban has retired. So LSU would target several of these guys, but I think for the most part, Alabama is going to be able to keep this roster intact as long as, you know, here it is Thursday, January 11th, if they name a coach by the weekend. If it starts stretching the next week, then you're going to see guys being tampered with and already seeking NIL offers elsewhere. But LSU will certainly be in the mix if, you know, some of those big name guys actually do enter the portal.
And then lastly, we talk about this. I just want to get your thoughts generally here because there's a lot of just college football fans that peruse 24/7 sports. Maybe they have a membership with us, but they check out a lot of different message boards. The domino effect of Nick Saban leaving Alabama, not just for LSU, but let's say, hey, it's someone from Oregon. Let's say it's somewhere. I mean, you start to really kind of dive into this, Brad. I mean, this is something that could affect LSU, not even, you know, outrightly just with them, but potential opponents they might have in 2023 or 2024 outside of Alabama. What type of domino effect are we looking at here with Nick Saban retiring?
I mean, let's do a quick hypothetical. What if Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss coach, is the hire, you know, there at Alabama? Then Ole Miss opens up. Ole Miss all of a sudden is not the team that everybody expects to be preseason top 5. I've got the Rebels number 3 in my way too early poll. Like I'm that high on Lane Kiffin and what he's doing in Oxford. Then you've got a all-star lineup that enters the portal at Ole Miss. They're not going to stay at Ole Miss. They might stay at Bama. They're not staying at Oxford. So we could see just a chain reaction of sorts. If Dan Lanning takes the job at Alabama, you've got Oregon opening. You know that's going to leave a elite coach probably leaving that job. Maybe Kalen DeBoer leaves Washington, doesn't go to the NFL, but takes the Oregon job. And then there's the rumor of Kirby Smart and the Atlanta Falcons, which I was told this morning, a few of my friends at the AFCA coach convention in Nashville, there's some real buzz about Kirby Smart potentially leaving. Jim Harbaugh could leave. So
wow,
we could have 3 of the top 5 coaches in college football, not named Brian Kelly, leave the programs in, you know, a 1 or 2 week span, especially if Harbaugh leaves too. So it's just going to be a wild rest of the month, I would think. And if I'm a Georgia fan right now, Michigan fan, Oregon fan, I'm waiting on pins and needles. All this could be super beneficial for LSU and their title run in 2024.
Yeah, we could come out of this and, you know, LSU fans come out of this looking around and Brian Kelly looking around saying, hey, where'd this coaching fraternity go that I was surrounded by? But hey, it's a wild, wacky time of the year, and we're about to just embark on probably one of the craziest Januaries and Februaries we've ever seen in this sport. But Brad, I appreciate you taking some time to hop on with us. Before we get out of here, for folks that might not be familiar with your work, they're just catching you on the pod, where can they find what you do, and where can they follow you on social?
Yeah, B Crawford 247 on social media platform X. I've got an Instagram page pretty active, and then 24/7 Sports' homepage. Man, I'm writing a ton of SEC and now Big Ten content. Now that college football is essentially a 2-league super sport.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. LSU fans just glad to be a part of it. We appreciate you for watching and listening, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, or you're watching on the YouTube channel. Those numbers are continuing to climb. We appreciate your support. My name is Bryce Koon. He is Brad Crawford. Stay tuned. Recruiting episodes, more transfer portal talk, and more LSU coaching decisions coming over at Go 24/7. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.